Hey, Encounter Church, I am thrilled for you today. Today you get to hear from one of the sharpest leaders in the American church. As I was preparing through the series, largely inspired by Craig Groeschel's book, I got to this message for this week and realized, as I was working through notes, studying and researching, that what he said at his church the week he discussed this specific topic was incredible and was so good that either I was going to take his notes and literally just read them to you, or I would get an opportunity for him to share it with you. And because of their generosity as a church and their willingness to make their resources available to other churches, we have an opportunity this weekend to hear from Craig Groeschel. So I hope you're sitting down and you've got a notebook, because what you're about to hear is life-changing. And as we've discussed this month about winning the war in our mind, he's about to give you an incredible weapon for that battle.
If you've been with us over the past couple of weeks, we've been talking about the power of the mind. As God created the mind is so incredibly powerful. And we talked about the reality that it's incredibly complex, but we have something that's called neural pathways. What's so interesting is every time you think a thought, you're actually creating patterns or pathways in your brain. And the more often you think a thought, the easier it is to think that thought again. I want to expand on that idea today and introduce what will be some idea to some of you. I want to talk to you about what people call cognitive biases, or it's often called a mental filter. What is a cognitive bias? A very simple definition for a cognitive bias is a mistake in reasoning based on personal experiences or preferences. It's a mistake in reasoning based on what you've experienced or what you prefer. We could call it a mental filter or a mental framework in your life. In other words, if you grew up in a context and you had something really bad happen to you, a lot of times you have a framework of thinking or a filter through which you might see a situation inaccurately. For example, maybe, unfortunately, there are many of you that grew up around very abusive men. And so because you were hurt and abused by men, now a lot of times when you see men, all men aren't hurtful and all of them aren't abusive, but because of what you endured, your filter tends to shape how you see men, and because of what happened to you, oftentimes you may make an inaccurate judgment about someone around you. Or, for example, you might have grown up with parents who said bad things about wealthy people, like all wealthy people are bad, they're evil, they're whatever, and then you find yourself starting to succeed financially later in life, and you might feel guilty or ashamed, and it's not that it's bad, but your filter shapes how you see it. The filters you have shape how you see life. What's interesting is if you change the filter, it often changes how you feel. Change the filter changes the feel. And we know that if you're posting a photo that's not very good on social media, but you change the filter. How many of you have ever done that before? I liked this picture that I had of Amy and me until one of my kids got a hold of it and changed the filter. And when you change the filter, it completely changes the feel, right? It's same, not just in a photo, but it's very true in your life. Change the filter, it changes the feel. What is a cognitive bias? A cognitive bias is what we might call a default filter. It's when our brain is pre-wired to think in a certain way, or it's pre-wired to interpret a situation even if our interpretation isn't completely accurate. This is why two different people can respond totally differently to the exact same situation. It's not the facts that are different. What is it? It's the filter. For example, you might be at your workplace and your supervisor might go and give the exact same feedback in the exact same way, almost in the exact same time to two different people. And the way they receive the feedback can be very, very different. One person gets offended. Why are you telling me that? You don't know how valuable I am. I don't even like you anyway. Who do you think you are giving me that feedback? You don't know how much I bring to this company. And the next person with the same exact feedback and a different filter may say, well, thank you. That was really helpful. Now I can do a better job. I really appreciate the fact that you valued me. Thank you for that feedback. It's not the facts that are different. What is it? It's the filter. Type that in the chat. It's the filter. Two different people can walk into a church. Two people together, and one can walk in convinced that all Christians are hypocrites. I hate the music. This place is stupid. I never want to come back. And right next to that person can be someone else who experiences the very same thing that says, these people are amazing. They're so loving. I love the music. Maybe I'm here because God wants me here. It's not the facts that are different. What is it? It's the filter. Depending on what news sources you consume. You can read or watch some news sources and you can be convinced that the vaccine is the answer to every problem this year. Or if you read different sources, you can be convinced it's the most dangerous thing that will kill you and it probably has a chip in it to track you, right? It's not I know I'm getting into dangerous territory, but just work with me, okay? Just work. I know your side is right, whatever it is, you're right. I know you're right because I'm not informed, but you're right, okay? You're right. It's not the facts that are different. What is it? It's the filter. It's what you take in. You can see examples of this even through Scripture. There's a powerful one if you want to read about this in the Old Testament. It's in Numbers chapter 13 and 14 when Moses sent 12 spies out to explore the land. 12 of them went out, saw the same exact thing, but the reports were entirely different. It wasn't the facts that were different. What was it? It was the filter. 2 of them came back and said, oh my gosh, it's beautiful, it's amazing, it's perfect. God has given us this, let's go take the land. 10 came back, which is funny to me that it was 10 out of 12 that were negative. Almost perhaps representative of hopefully not our church, but a lot of places out there where it's way more easy to be negative, afraid, and critical than it is to fight for a positive attitude. 10 came back and said, this is dangerous. The land devours people, which is really funny. The land devours people, and they're giants, and we are like grasshoppers in their eyes. What I promise you is nobody went up and interviewed one of these giants. What happened is their filter changed their perception of how they felt, and they felt like grasshoppers in the eyes of everyone. It wasn't the facts that were different. What was it? It was the filter. But it's not just the filter that matters. It's also the frame. You can be in the very same situation, and how you frame something determines how you see it. And I want to give you a tool that I've worked with my counselor on that's called reframing. Let's adapt a tool called reframing, and I'm gonna give you a simple definition of reframing. What does it mean to reframe a situation or reframe a relationship? Reframing is creating a different way of looking at a situation or relationship by changing its meaning. It's simply creating a different way of interpreting or looking at a situation or a relationship by changing its meaning. And I'll give you an example of how you can reframe a day. Let's say you wake up and you determine ahead of time, this is gonna be a bad day. If you frame a day like this, you can say very easily, this is gonna be a hard day. I got so much to do today. I work with these people that drive me crazy today. I don't know how I'm gonna get it all done. I'm so overwhelmed, I'm so tired, life is hard, life is bad. Oh my gosh, what am I doing? My husband driving me crazy, these kids, why do we have all these kids? I'm sick of my stupid car, I hate the people I work with, I hate my job. The very same day, you can have a bad day if you frame it the wrong way. If instead you take the exact same situation and you reframe it, you may wake up and say, oh, I've got a lot going today, but I'm so thankful my God is with me. I'm thankful that he's for me. I'm thankful he's given me a job. I'm thankful for my old clunker that gets me to this job. Even though some people drive me crazy at work, I'm actually thankful for them because they're pretty good people. I believe today's gonna be a good day. We're gonna grind it out. We're gonna get a lot done. It's not the facts that change, but it's how you frame it. I'm afraid that there are so many people that start to frame even God by saying, I don't like what's going on, God, rather than looking for the goodness of God in the day. It's not just the facts that are different, it's often the filter or it's often the frame. And what do we know about what goes on in life? You can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you frame it. You can't control what happens to you, but the good news is you can control how you frame it. What I want to do is slow this down for just a moment and ask you to think about your life right now. Think even about the expectations that you often have in your mind. And I wonder how many of you wanted something in life, but right now you're experiencing the opposite. You thought that by this time I would be doing such and such, or I would be in this place, or I would have this, or I would have accomplished this, or I would have had this relationship. And you really, really wanted something, but instead of achieving or accomplishing or having or being where you wanted, instead you're maybe at the exact opposite. Maybe some of you dreamed about having a great marriage, and that's exactly what you wanted. And you prepared for it, and you prayed about it, and you were pure, and you worked toward it with everything in you. And you married your sweetheart, and then years later, you ended up where you never wanted to be, brokenhearted and divorced. Maybe for you, you went to college and studied and got the degree and felt like you were prepared to do something that would be meaningful. And now instead of being in a job that you love, you're in an unrelated job that seems like it's way beneath your education. And you wonder, how in the world did I get here? Maybe for you, it was that you got to a point in your life where you thought, I'd be married, or I'd be financially out of debt, or I'd be able to travel, or I'd have a ministry, or I'd be making a difference, or I would have started my business, or I'd be leading the business, or my kids would have been better off. And you find yourself waking up going, why am I not where I wanted to be? And you're so confused by it. If you ever wake up and think, this isn't what I wanted the exact opposite, the Apostle Paul knows exactly what you feel like. In fact, his story is incredibly emotional to me because he had a heart for God and only wanted to serve God and only wanted to please God. And he felt called to go to Rome to preach the gospel. And he knew if he could reach the people in Rome, that would be the strategic place to help the gospel spread all over the world. So his dream, his bucket list, his top prayer list, his greatest desire, his calling was to go to Rome to preach. And instead of being in Rome preaching, he finds himself in Rome as a prisoner, locked up in house arrest, awaiting possible execution. Everything that he wanted. And he got the exact opposite. Paul could have framed the situation in one of different ways. He could have framed it on the negative side, and this is what he would have said if he had framed it that way. From Philippians chapter 1, verses 12 and 13 from the NWV version. NWV stands for the New Whiners version. He could have said this. He could have said, now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what's happened to me really sucks. As a result of all the hell I've been through, I'm quitting life group and I'm never going back to church. That's what he could have said in the NWV. Now, for those of you that are new to church, I just want you to know that's not a real version of the Bible. I just feel like I should say that. You're like on your U version about, where's the NWV? I can't find it anywhere. It's my favorite version. Okay, that's not real. What he did, though, is he reframed it. And I want to read you the verse. This is what the verse says. He said, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me, although it may really look bad to most people, it has actually served to advance the gospel. He said this, give me the next verse. He said, as a result, it's become clear to those in the palace guard, guess what? Even though it looks like I'm in bad shape, when I reframe it, it's clear to everyone else that I'm actually in chains for Christ. What's happening? I'm locked up to a Roman guard. 8 hours, every 8 hours, I get a new one. Who do you think the real prisoner is here? I'm getting to preach to a captive audience, and I get a new influential person. every 8 hours who has to sit there and listen to my 8-hour sermon on how good Jesus is. Verse 14, he says this, and because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become even more confident in the Lord. And guess what? It looks bad, but because I'm in chains, they are daring to proclaim the gospel even more boldly without fear. It's not the facts that are different, it's how you frame it. And what I want to do today is I want to talk to you about how you can reframe your story and your relationships. Because what I know right now, many of you got a battle going on in your mind. Your life may have some complications. Guess what? We all do. We all have stuff. Every single one of us. There hadn't been a day without some stuff. It's stuff in your family, it's stuff with your kids, it's stuff with your neighbors, it's stuff with the people you work with. Stuff. Bad doctor report stuff, bad behavior stuff, fighting with your spouse stuff, financial problem stuff, fear stuff, bad news on the news stuff, bad news in your family stuff, bad news in your extended family, stuff. And so often, so much of life is generally pretty decent, but often it's the small part of the stuff that ends up taking us out of God's perfect will. I want to talk to you about reframing your story and relationships, and I'm gonna give you 3 specific tools that can help us renew our minds, win the war in our minds so God can change our thinking, which will change our life. Let me give you 3 really simple tools. The first thing is, number 1, is I wanna encourage you occasionally to thank God for what didn't happen. To thank God for what didn't happen. I'll give you an example of this. There was a 20-year-old girl that said, Mom and Dad, I've got really bad news to tell you. I need you to sit down. And she said, let me tell the whole story, and I just want you to stay calm, but it's really bad news. I went out to a bar, I met a guy, we drank too much, he came back to my apartment, we hooked up, and I'm embarrassed to say I'm pregnant. The good news is that his probation will be over in a year, and he's gonna start looking for a job once he's out of rehab. And he'll consider marrying me, but since we can't afford to get married now, he's just gonna move in right now. And she let it hang for a moment. Then she said, actually, none of that's true. The truth is I got a D on my chemistry exam, and I just wanted you to know it could be a whole lot worse. There may be a time where some of you ought to thank God for what didn't happen in your kid's life, right? Well, I don't know what it would be, but maybe you missed your goal at work and you had a target so you could get your bonus, and you ended up not getting your bonus, and you feel devastated by that. But you can thank God that in a very challenged and compromised economy that you didn't actually lose your job, and suddenly you're reframing a situation rather than just focusing on what's wrong, you can actually see what's right. You might get in a car wreck. One of my kids not too long ago, we get a little fender bender. Oh my gosh, it's gonna be expensive, and there's insurance hassle and a deductible, and we're not gonna be in a car. Or you can say, you know what? Thank God nobody got hurt. Thank God that it wasn't that big of a deal. In the whole scheme of things, there are some things that are a big deal, but so often it's things that aren't that end up taking us off. And if you'll take a step back every now and then and look with a broader perspective, instead of focusing on what you hate, you may just change the frame and say, God, I thank you for what didn't happen. There are so many good things. I'm not gonna let this one category take me off of being encouraged by your will. Thank God for what didn't happen. The second thing you can do is practice what we call pre-framing. Pre-framing, deciding how you'll frame a situation before you engage in the situation. Why does this matter? Because our thoughts or frames often shape what we experience. If you go in and say, this meeting's gonna be horrible, I hate these people, it's so dull, you think you're gonna have a good meeting? You're gonna have a bad meeting. If you go in instead and say, you know what, we're gonna do our best, we're gonna be productive, we're gonna enjoy the people that we're around, it's gonna change. Oh, we're going out, I hate all this, I hate these stupid events, it's gonna be a pain, these people. Oh, you know what, I'm thankful I'm with some people that I love, we're gonna have a good time. The way you frame it often changes how you perceive it. And I'll give you an example of how I reframed a failure. Back in high school, one of the sports I played was tennis. And I've got some pictures of, evidently all I knew how to do was hit a backhand in the pictures. But my sophomore year, I played #1 singles for little Ardmore, Oklahoma. And in the state finals, I was in the quarterfinals. I was playing against the #4 ranked seed, a guy named Mandy Ochoa, who was a legend. So I'm an unranked, unseeded nobody against a senior. I'm a sophomore, and he was a legend. And somehow we split sets, 1 set to him, 1 set to me. In the third set, I was up 5-1, 40 love against the #4 ranked player in the state. Big crowd, massive crowd of like 12 people gathered to watch this potential upset. And if I won any of the 3 next points, they're called match points. You win any one, and I win the match. Well, I didn't win those. He went on to do. I ended up having 7 match points in the third set. I was up 5-1, 40 love with 7 match points. I lost them all, and Mandy Ochoa came back to beat me 7-5 in the third set. Oh. And I developed a reputation and a nickname called Gro-Choka. If Groeschel gets in a tight match, he's gonna tighten up and he's gonna choke. And I started to own a very negative label. Thankfully, I had a great mentor and a coach who sometime later got up into my business, and essentially, he didn't use this term, but essentially he said, we're gonna reframe that. What I want you to realize is you've been in some of the tightest matches around, and what have you learned? I said, I learned what doesn't work. And he said, what doesn't work? Whenever you get tense, whenever you don't hit out. So what do you do in a tight match? He said, ask me. He said, you go for it. You bring more into it. You let loose. You bring your energy. You exhale, and you bring your best. You bring your all. And he said, what I want you to do is essentially reframe your situation. Because of your experience now, you are prepared to become a great pressure player. That very simple little thing, I'm telling you, I was just a kid. It has stayed with me to this day. Hey, I may have choked in some tight situations, but listen to me. Because of my experience, God has enabled me to be great under pressure. In the most complicated leadership situations, when I visualize how I will lead, I never see myself choking, never see myself failing. I see myself walking in with the power of God, His Spirit within me, completely confident. I will lead well because I'm a pressure player. I've already pre-framed it. Some of you're pre-framing your failure before you ever get there. Take whatever shortcoming you have, learn from it, pre-frame it, and walk in believing that God will enable you to be successful. What can you do? You can thank God for what didn't happen. You can pre-frame a situation. And the third thing is you can look for God's goodness. You can look for God's goodness, because I promise you, you will always find what you're looking for. If you look for the good, you can find good. If you look for the bad, you'll find bad. If you want to see what's wrong every single day, you can find what's wrong every single day. If you want to not like people, you can find a ton of reasons to not like people. But if you want to look for God, if you want to see faith, if you want to see the best, you can. It's just like the difference between a vulture and a hummingbird. What does a vulture find? Every day, vulture flies around. What does a vulture find? Dead stuff. Dead things, roadkill. But what does a hummingbird find? Every day the hummingbird finds sweet things. I promise you, you'll always find whatever you're looking for. If you want to see what's wrong, what's bad, what's not working, what's wrong with the world, you can live a really depressed, negative life. But instead, if you want to look for where God is working, you can see He's still on the throne, and He's still good, and He's still powerful, and He still answers prayers. It's called cognitive reframing. And a good therapist will do a tool with you. Cognitive reframing is empowering you to decide the meaning of an event. You decide. I'm gonna take it up a level and say this. Let's not just do cognitive reframing where you decide, but let's let Jesus help you decide the meaning of a situation. Let's let Jesus frame it for you. And I'll show you what this means to me. Amy and I were at an event recently. I spoke at a pastor's event with, there were probably 100, 125 pastors of what would be considered the most prominent churches in the country. Many of you would know many of the pastors who were there. And what was interesting is almost to every single one, when we talked privately, they said last year was the worst year ever. And their spouses talked to Amy going, it was the worst year ever. And there was just this heaviness and this a sense from some almost of hopelessness of how do we recover in the church world. And I looked back over last year and have had those thoughts. And every single one of you in your own way had your own version of this. And so I don't want to pretend like my year was worse than yours, but you had some version. My version was, quarantined as like one of the first people in the country back in February, and then the church shut down. And there's this massive fear of like, what do you do when you can't meet? How do you even navigate through that for almost 3 months? Then there was if you reopen, you're dangerous, was what some of you thought. If you don't reopen, you got no faith, is what others of you thought. And then there was the whole mask thing, like meaning if you wear a mask, you're a flaming liberal. If you don't wear a mask, you're dangerous to the world. And I mean, we're talking about like hatred from Christians. And then there was the growing awareness of the racial tension. And even with the purest of intentions of trying to love people well, it doesn't seem like any of us got that exactly right. Then the political divide, which we all know so well. And here we find ourselves in the middle of a very difficult situation looking, going, this was the worst year ever. Or was it? Because when I started looking back through my old pictures on my phone, I didn't see any of that bad stuff. And I'll show you just a small glimpse of what I saw. I was one of the first people quarantined, and I was exposed to the virus in Germany in February, came back, and for 14 days, didn't see Amy. This is the closest I got to her is this photo. This is me, the guy on the right down the bottom with a mask on and a shirt over his head. For some reason, I thought that would help the virus from jumping across the yard to get her. And I'm telling you right now, it was the most intimate, spiritual, meaningful time with Amy. We FaceTimed and talked from across the house, and I fell more in love with her, not being with her. And it's amazing how much I loved her. Then my married daughters were quarantined back in like March and April. I don't know what they were doing, but somehow we ended up getting these two amazing little blessings. And then at church, we had some restructuring, which enabled my son-in-law, Luke, to get promoted to a youth pastor job at his church in the greater Tulsa area. And Anna and Luke bought their first house, and they didn't have a baby, they had a dog. And then that doesn't mean anything, but Amy learned to cut hair, which I thought was funny. But I got more time with my kids, and instead of working out in the gym, I worked out with my sons and had more time with them. And then I had what I call Adventures with Joy, where we went all over the place and we found some sort of a skull here. We're not sure if it's a cow head or a dinosaur head. We think it's probably a dinosaur head. But as I look back over the last year, it's easy at first glance to think it was the worst year ever. But actually, I see so many incredible blessings when I reframe it. And when you look at the church that had to close down for months, and then attendance is like half of what it used to be. But somehow, in the middle of that, my God, who is always faithful, managed to see more people come to Jesus last year than any year previous. And now when I look back, it doesn't seem so bad. It doesn't seem so bad. It's reframing. In other words, if God is working in all things for good, then it's time to reject the unhealthy thoughts. Do away with those frames that tell you can't and you won't and you're nothing and you're a failure and you're not smart, and we're gonna reframe it. And what we're doing is we're not passively receiving circumstances, but we're actively interpreting it. And guess what? We're not interpreting the goodness of God through our circumstances, but we're interpreting our circumstances through the goodness of God. What has happened has actually served to advance the gospel, because you cannot control what happens to you, but you can control how you frame it. Do not be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And when you know the truth will set you free.
Special thank you to Pastor Craig and to his congregation for their generosity and being willing to share that teaching with us. I knew there was no way I could do justice to what we just saw. And I'm so grateful that they didn't ask me to copy it. They just gave us a copy. So I hope you found that as powerful and as hopeful and as helpful as I did. Before we wrap up today, I just want to say a special thank you for those who call Encounter Church home. I'm sitting in the room as the team is getting ready to prep for next month's boxes. Every single month, almost 70 kids get a box from Encounter Church, from toddler up to elementary. These are kids, families who've subscribed to these boxes. If you're interested in subscribing, you're not, you can do that at encounterchurch.com/kids. But every single month, our team gathers in this room and puts together these incredible boxes that show up magically at homes all around this region. And what's incredible is that through this season of this pandemic, we've actually grown our kids ministry. We are engaging more kids with boxes today than we were 6 months, 10 months ago. That we've seen families add, word of mouth and spread, and all of this, all these random items that will be put together, that'll be packaged to go along with the video, all of this happens because of you. Your generosity, your gifts, translate very practically into things that I clearly don't have a clue about right now, from sticks to plates to little tiny fish that swim around, right? To party blowers. All of this would not happen if it wasn't for your generosity. So special thank you to all of those who give, to all of those who've automated their giving. Your generosity is paving the way for kids to grow in their faith and to be reminded in a year where we've had so much hopelessness and so much uncertainty and so much questions in general, that they've been reminded of a God who loves them, a God who has a plan for them, and a God who's for them and with them. And so know that you're making an investment, not just in where we are this year, but in generations to come, because the pandemic hasn't shaped our children the way it's shaped others because of the hope foundation you've helped to lay. So we're grateful for you. And before we wrap up today, our team has a song entitled Spirit Lead Me. And it's a song that captures in simple prayer form this desire: God, help me. Help me to see things the way you see them. As Pastor Craig shared today, help me to reframe the situations through your lens, through your character, and through your power and what you're able to do. So I want to pray for you, and then our team is going to lead us into a song, and then I will see you back here next week for the next portion of this series, Winning the Battle in Our Minds. Let's pray. God, thank you. Thank you for the people who make this possible every single week through their generosity. God, thank you for your generosity that makes everything possible. And I pray that you would help us with your eyes and your wisdom to see and to re-see what we see around us. That you would give us the courage, the creativity to reframe our circumstances. That you, Holy Spirit, would lead us. And it's in your name, Jesus, that I pray. Amen.